I have a plan to make $100 a month in passive income from my dividends, and my portfolio is going to look a lot different than what you're used to seeing here on Finance YouTube. My name is Raj. On this channel, we talk about money, and in this video, my money. Let's get into it. I mean, who doesn't want an extra $100 a month for doing absolutely nothing? That's how dividends work. And this is some serious extra money coming in every month that could pay bills, get reinvested, or maybe even buy 5.5 Big Macs from this McDonald's in Connecticut. Now, if you're like me and you watch other YouTube videos about people sharing their dividend accounts, you found them inspiring, but might have thought that their level of success was so insanely out of reach. All of the videos I saw had huge monthly dividend numbers, and that matched up to massive portfolios with values worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in some cases, approaching $1 million. I'm planning on getting at least $100 a month in dividends with around $15,000 invested. Although some of the investments we'll go over, I admit, are higher risk, but are also relatively new, which is probably why there aren't a lot of people talking about them. Before we get any further along, remember, this is just me sharing with you what my plan is and what I'm doing at the moment. And that plan might need to be altered as my financial situation changes and as I get new information. So be sure to speak to a professional about your investments, as I'm not a financial advisor and this isn't financial advice. So after playing around in the markets for a few years, I eventually made a plan for my future. And part of that is for me to make my Robinhood account a source of income in addition to my retirement accounts. So given this account is an extra source of income I'm trying to build, I'm okay with a little more risk, less growth, and less diversification for a higher dividend yield. But I also have to manage that risk because I don't want to have to worry about the positions since I have a long-term horizon, and worrying about my investments for decades doesn't sound like fun. Worrying about them when I'm using them for my retirement income sounds even worse, but I also need to manage tax efficiency because this is in a traditional Robinhood account, and taxes apply to dividends as soon as you get them. This is a negative about this strategy, but remember, there are advantages to these accounts like liquidity. So if I ever need to sell a position for any reason, like if what I'm holding isn't doing as well as expected, my investment plans change, or if I just need the cash, I can do so without any penalty, except for capital gains, which isn't really a bad thing since that means I made money. So after some research, I found 5 ETFs that I really liked individually, and I think the combination of all of them makes for a good side income portfolio specifically for me, my risk tolerance, my overall goal, and works in combination with my other retirement holdings outside of this account as well. I know a lot of people go with individual stocks when it comes to dividends, but I personally don't want to take on the risk of an individual stock cutting its dividend, which is why I went the ETF route. And as you'll see in a moment, some of these ETFs have higher yields than some individual dividend stocks. The first ETF is SCHD, or the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF. I really like this ETF because it has a long-term history of growth. Its growth is on par with the overall market, and it pays out a higher dividend compared to other ETFs that track the overall market, which means that if you invested in it and it grows in value, its dividend payout should go up over time, which can help keep up with inflation. And because I really believe in this ETF long-term, I would have no problem eventually passing these shares along to the next generation. So this is what I would consider the main anchor of this portfolio, and is why I'm able to take some risks overall without losing too much sleep. Now, the best part about this ETF is its tax efficiency. Most, if not all, of the dividends from SCHD are considered qualified dividends after you own them for a period of time, which means you pay less taxes on them compared to non-qualified dividends, and in a traditional Robinhood account, that is very attractive. And considering that this portfolio could be worth a significant amount one day, I want most of the funds to be in this ETF. But SCHD is not a perfect ETF, which is why there are 4 others in this portfolio. The second ETF is SPHD, or the Invesco S&P 500 High Dividend Low Volatility ETF, which is similar to SCHD, but it offers some exposure to real estate, and it pays a monthly dividend compared to SCHD's quarterly dividend. I'm not necessarily holding this ETF because of the monthly dividend. I see that as a bonus, especially since the other 3 ETFs in the portfolio serve that purpose a little better. I just like the fact that it's relatively stable, does have some exposure to real estate that SCHD is totally lacking, and owning it, I won't feel the need to buy REITs like I did in the past, given that I own this ETF. Now, I know there are far better ETFs for real estate exposure, exposure and some really good REITs on the market, but in the future, I'm planning on purchasing physical real estate in some way, shape, or form, so I don't want to overexpose this portfolio with those future plans in mind, and I have a tendency to hop in and out of REITs in this account, and I'm not trying to fall back into bad habits. So despite there being a ton of better options, this works for me for right now. The third ETF is JEPI, or the JP Morgan Equity Premium Income ETF. Now, this is by far one of my favorite ETFs for cash flow at the moment. It pays a high yield dividend monthly, and it can do this because the fund uses covered calls to generate a profit that it then uses to pay us as investors. So from my experience trading options in 2020, having someone who knows what they're doing do it for me is absolutely up my alley. So these are not qualified dividends, but this ETF, although it being relatively new, does have a decent track record, although I do recognize that covered calls will limit my growth and will likely not perform as well in bear markets, and not see as much growth as possible during bull markets as well. The fourth ETF is JEPQ, or the JP Morgan NASDAQ Equity Premium Income ETF. This ETF is very similar to JEPI, but where JEPI uses the S&P 500 for its trading strategy, JEPQ focuses on the NASDAQ 100, and because of the covered calls, JEPQ can produce a high dividend as well, and I like the slight exposure to the NASDAQ 100 it provides for this portfolio. The fifth and final ETF is the most unique ETF I've come across lately. It's SVOL, or the Simplified Volatility Premium ETF. This ETF doesn't track a stock or group of stocks. It actually makes money from futures contracts and what happens with the VIX, or what we use to measure fear in the market. This is definitely what I would consider to be a high-risk investment given its complex nature and lack of history. But the yield is significant. It's not the most expensive ETF to buy at the moment, and I'm okay with the risk and potentially less dividends when the market stabilizes. And I am always on guard with this position because eventually the VIX will spike, which will affect this ETF's price and dividend, so I have no idea what's going to happen in my money when that situation does occur, but I'm prepared for the worst. Now, I know that $100 in monthly dividends can seem far out of reach, but my strategy here is very simple. Invest as much as I can, keep investing regularly, pay my taxes, and let compound interest work its magic. This is going to be an expensive portfolio to own, given the expense ratios of some of the ETFs, the tax implications, the risk I'm taking on, and the fact that this overall is not nearly as diversified as some investors would like. But remember, this is my extra account and is effectively where I put extra money if it's available. After all my bills and expenses are paid, my 6-month savings account is topped off, and traditional retirement accounts are funded. So instead of putting my loose change into a jar and forgetting about it for a few years, or letting it sit in a savings account with an interest rate that is basically zero, I'm deciding to actively take that money and put it to work immediately so it can earn more pennies, which will turn into dollars, and then more dollars, and the cycle repeats. All right, let's get into the actual portfolio as it stands today. I've been building this account very slowly with my extra month-to-month funds starting in March of 2022. My short-term goal is to get to $100 a month in dividends, then work towards 100 shares for each individual ETF, and then long-term add more funds over time to balance out the portfolio so that SCHD and SPHD are weighted more heavily than JEPI and JEPQ, and keeping SVOL as the smallest position given its higher risk, and then once the positions are balanced appropriately, work up to $1,000 a month in dividends overall while maintaining the balance of the fund. Currently, I have 35.2 shares of SCHD for a market value of $2,439.75, 1 share of SPHD for a market value of $40.97, and why there's only 1 share is because for a while I was prioritizing SCHD shares over SPHD because of SCHD's tax efficiency, but I didn't want to forget about it, and I'll add more to the position eventually. 15.26 shares of JEPI for a market value of $820.91, 15.4 shares of JEPQ for a market value of $747.76, and 69.01 shares of SVOL for a market value of $1,562.30. So altogether, this portfolio is worth $5,611.69. So if I do nothing to these positions, I can estimate around $19 in dividends from SCHD next quarter, or on average $6.33 a month, 18 cents from SPHD, $4.50 from JEPI, $6 from JEPQ, and $18 from SVOL. This is all based on very rough averages from my previous dividend payouts. So next month, I'll receive roughly about $28 $3.50 in dividends, and if we take in SCHD as a monthly average, that brings us up to about $34.83 in dividends. And that's from an overall portfolio value of just $5,611.69. Not bad for simply doing nothing. Now, in order to get to $100 a month, keeping everything the same in terms of the existing portfolio balance, I would roughly need to triple my positions, which means adding an additional $11,223.38. But because my medium-term goal is to get to 100 shares of all 5 ETFs, the next money that goes into this account is going to SVOL. If I add 30.99 shares, that would cost me around $701.61. That would bump up my monthly dividend amount by about $9, although that would be in the highest risk ETF in this portfolio, but it does check off the $100 share goal for SVOL. From there, I would no longer be adding to SVOL, but rather adding to SPHD, given that I only own 1 share at the moment, and I would turn off dividend reinvestments to SVOL and use those dividends and invest them into SPHD until I hit 15 shares to match JEPI. So overall, that would require an additional $536.62, not counting any dividends from SVOL. Those additional 14 shares of SPHD would also add about $2.52 in monthly dividends. So just adding those 2 positions alone, I can expect about $46.35 on average in monthly dividends. This would put me at a portfolio value of $6,849.92. At this point, I'd be prioritizing JEPI and JEPQ investments in about equal parts to get to $100 in dividends, given they have a high yield and I'm okay with the risk given the reward. So since I need an additional $53.65 in monthly dividends, I'll be looking to get about $27 from JEPI and $27 from JEPQ. Since JEPI on average is paying out about 30 cents per share a month in dividends, I would need 90 shares to get an additional $27, which would cost me $4,842. This would also put me over my 100 share goals for JEPI if I bought it in one lump sum. So when I do get to that point, I would turn off dividend reinvesting and funnel those dividends to other assets under the 100 share goal. For JEPQ, it's on average paying me 38 cents per share a month, so I would need 71 shares for an additional $27, which would cost $3,447.05 in one purchase. So this hypothetical investment portfolio overall would cost roughly $15,138.97 and bring in an additional $100 from dividends and income every month. And hypothetically, you could earn $1,000 a month with just over $151,000 invested if you're comfortable with the risk. But because I'm not comfortable with that risk long term, I would then start prioritizing SCHD until I get to 100 shares, since I want this to start compounding as fast as possible. And if I can afford to, leave dividend reinvesting on for SCHD to take full advantage of compounding early and often. Then investing until I have at least 100 shares of SPHD, then 100 shares of JEPQ. Then I would turn off dividend reinvesting entirely for all positions if they're not already off, take those dividends earned and new money added to the portfolio, add it appropriately to SCHD until it consisted of 40% of the portfolio, have SPHD weigh in around 20%, have JEPI weigh in around 15%, have JEPQ also weigh in around 50%, and then SVOL weigh in for the remaining 10%. So from there, I'd let the positions sit passively and invest regularly to keep the positions balanced and then monitor them for underperformance, excessive risk, or better alternatives. And of course, the huge issue with this strategy is taxes. So I will always need to be monitoring my tax burden, and eventually these dividends in this account will just get significant enough that I can't just float it from other sources of income or savings. So at some point in the future, like I mentioned earlier, I will need to turn off dividend reinvestments entirely, take some of that cash and pay the IRS, and reinvest manually. But I'm okay with that because it means I made money, and this is just an extra account for me and honestly a lot of fun. So I'm treating it like a game that pays me to play. I also need to watch out for the fact that 3 of these ETFs are extremely new and their historical performance is unknown. And for all 5 of these ETFs, I have no idea what their future performance is going to be. So it's true that I might lose money overall, dividend payouts might drop, some of these dividend ETFs could be dividend traps. Some ETFs will perform in certain markets better than others, and basically every risk is present when it comes to investing in this account, so I don't encourage you to follow me blindly. So I recognize that my overall plan is probably more risky and complex than it needs to be and will require more manual oversight than most people are comfortable with. But I don't necessarily mind it, given that I can supercharge my dividends early on and reach dividend milestones earlier than expected with some higher risk alternative investments. which in turn is going to keep me motivated to keep investing and gives me a better shot at actually reaching my goal. And that's kind of the best part. It's personal finance, and this is just what I personally am doing with a small part of my overall portfolio that makes sense for me at the moment. So thanks for letting me share it with you. And remember, this is just a side portfolio and plans may change as things happen in my life, which is why I love the flexibility of this account. I know we glazed over a lot of the details for the ETFs and we focused more on the thought process, current holdings, and future plans of the Robinhood account, but I don't think this is the best place to put the bulk of your investments, especially if you're a young investor. I personally believe that the S&P 500, large tech stocks, the international market, bonds, real estate, and maybe even a little crypto are generally still the way to go for most investors. But of course, that's a conversation for you and your financial advisor, which I clearly am not, just some guy on YouTube. I mean, you don't even know if I'm wearing pants right now. And I know we just went over my account that's a Robinhood account, but be sure to check out the app Webull. You can buy stocks and other investments on their platform as well. And if you use my link down below, you can jumpstart your dividend portfolio with free stocks at the moment. So it's a great way to get your dividend journey started on the right foot. Remember that this is just my plan for now and plans may change in the future, but I'm curious to know what your investing plans are. So let me know in the comment section down below. All right, let's move on to how much I made so far. So I bought my one share of SPHD back in March of 2022, and since then it's paid a dividend every month for 19 total dividend payments, for a total payment of $2.92. I bought my first position of SCHD back in April of 2022, and since then my overall positions have paid 6 dividend payouts for a total of $109.23. I bought my first positions in JEPI back in April of 2023, and since then I've received 7 dividend payouts for a total of $25.54. I bought my first positions in SVOL back in April of 2023, and since then it's paid 7 dividend payouts for a total of $127.64. And finally, I bought my first position in JEPQ recently in October of 2023, and it's paid out 1 dividend worth $6.38 for a grand total of $271.71, which required no work for me whatsoever. And if it all works out, this will continue to grow over time. Hopefully this video inspired you to set a goal, believe it's possible, and make a plan that works for you to get to where you want to be, which is the whole point of this video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Good luck in the markets.